There has been an uproar about the recent advice to pregnant women, don't take Tylenol, myself included. And I've had to ask myself why. Why do I even care? Look, I delivered 5,000 babies during my career as an obstetrician. And that means I sat face to face with countless women in my office, giving them the best advice I could and listening to their deepest fears and struggles. And for those times I didn't listen, I am truly sorry. I should have done better. Today on Healthy Looks Great on You podcast, we're going to look at all of the current research linking Tylenol to autism and answer the question, does it harm women to advise them not to take Tylenol? There's a lot of noise in healthcare and you are too busy for fads. I'm Dr. Vicki and this is Healthy Looks Great on You, a lifestyle medicine podcast, life-tested, doctor-approved. On September 25th, 2025, the FDA issued a statement to physicians. There is a link to the FDA statement to physicians in the show notes. And in this episode, I am going to include links to everything I cite because sources matter. And when I provide quotes, they will be verbatim. But I want you to read all of these links for yourself for proper context. Remember when you were in high school and you dissected a frog? Well, today in many medical school, we are going to dissect what studies showed, what was said, and the current advice to pregnant women and why it matters. FDA Commissioner Marty Makary said, and I quote, "Notice to physicians on the use of acetaminophen during pregnancy in recent years, evidence has accumulated suggesting that the use of acetaminophen by pregnant women may be associated with an increased risk of neurologic conditions such as autism and ADHD in children. To be clear, while an association between acetaminophen and autism has been described in many studies, a causal relationship has not been established, and there are contrary studies in the scientific literature. This consideration should also be balanced with the fact that acetaminophen is the safest over-the-counter alternative in pregnancy among all analgesics and antipyretics. Aspirin and ibuprofen have well-documented adverse impacts on the fetus." Now that is a quote of what he said to doctors. And again, I want you to read this for yourself. It may be associated with, there are contrary studies, causal relationship has not been established. That's what he said to doctors. Acetaminophen is the safest over-the-counter alternative. Now let me stop right there and mention aspirin and ibuprofen, which includes Motrin, Aleve, and other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. These drugs are not an alternative to acetaminophen or Tylenol. In fact, taken late in pregnancy, they can cause the baby to have pulmonary hypertension, which can be fatal. So that's cautionary tale number 1 in this episode titled, "Is there any harm to advising pregnant women not to take Tylenol?" I mean, countless times I answered phone calls in the middle of the night from pregnant women asking what they could take for severe back pain, headaches, fever. Sometimes they even had kidney stones. And the answer was and is Tylenol, not ibuprofen. But stick with me because we've got to examine the recent evidence. In this FDA letter, doctors were advised to minimize acetaminophen use for routine low-grade fevers. And I'll be honest with you, that phrase just kind of made me scratch my head because what exactly is a routine fever? There's really no such thing. In medicine, a fever is defined as a temperature above 100.4 degrees. And if your temperature is 100.1, technically that's not even a fever. And most doctors would tell you to just ride it out without any medication, whether you're pregnant or not. So while the FDA may have meant well, that part of the advice didn't add anything new. Doctors already know what a fever is and they know how to treat it. And the bottom line is that acetaminophen is still the go-to option in pregnancy when it's needed. So if you're pregnant and you have a fever, a true fever, then Tylenol remains the safest thing on the shelf. And that is what the FDA statement said. And the key, and I want you to hear this clearly, is to use the lowest dose for the shortest amount of time needed, and that's been the medical advice for years and still is today. But Dr. Macri said in an interview with ABC News that Tylenol was shown to cause autism. But I think he probably just misspoke. And I get it. Last week on the podcast, I actually said antibiotics treat viral infections, and that is completely false. Antibiotics treat bacterial infections, and I said the wrong thing. So I edited that episode and I put out a correction, and hopefully that's what he will do as well, since he said to physicians that it had not been shown to cause autism, that it was just associated with it. And we'll get to what the difference is in a moment. And then to the public, he said that it did cause it. So hopefully he will realize that he kind of misspoke there. But so that you can hear it for yourself, I do have a link to that interview in the show notes, and I would encourage you to watch it in its entirety, because I do believe this is what is confusing to people, but it shouldn't be confusing to scientists and doctors. But let's move on. Let's examine what is currently on the White House website. And again, I want you to look at this for yourself. At the top, under all caps, it says FACT, F-A-C-T. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says, and I quote, "The Trump administration does not believe popping pills is always the answer for better health." Now, I'd like for you to put your politics aside for a moment, but this statement kind of offends me. I mean, I don't believe popping pills is always the answer for better health either. Do you think that? And does anyone think that you need to pop a pill every time you have a minor ache or pain? Okay. I give you that. The answer is probably yes. But I can promise you that in my vast experience, this is not the case for the overwhelming majority of pregnant women. Turns out that growing a human inside your body is a huge responsibility. And for most mamas, that responsibility is scary. Imagine thinking you're doing something that could harm the precious life inside you. Please stop shaming women. Frankly, this is insulting to doctors and mamas. But she goes on to say, there is mounting evidence finding a connection between acetaminophen use during pregnancy and autism. And I'll circle back to that in a minute when we go into a more advanced course in mini medical school and learn about research. So stay tuned, but let's move on. Continuing down the front page of the White House website, it says, and I'm quoting, "Today, President Donald J. Trump joined administration officials to announce major progress in understanding the root causes of autism, which has exploded in diagnoses over the past 2 decades, and unveil bold new initiatives to tackle the autism epidemic." And this is still a direct quote from the White House page. Predictably, the fake news immediately went into frenzied hyperventilation with their usual smears, distortions, and lies. That's the end of the quote, but what am I hearing? Do they not want you to listen to health experts or your own personal physician or all of the countless medical societies that are speaking out against this? Why do you think they're so upset? Do you think that they make money from the sale of Tylenol at the big box store? Or do you think they don't know what they're talking about because they're all really just pill pushers? Before moving on, one more question. Do you know any doctors? I mean, personally, like real ones, pediatricians from your church or docs like me. Do you think they're trustworthy? Now, maybe you understand one of the reasons that I'm taking this personally. When I heard in the press conference that women should just tough it out, that landed a little harsh for me because pregnancy is already so hard and women need clear medical advice, not judgment. If a fever is high or pain is severe, call your OB doctor because untreated fever can be risky. And that's why you should only take medical advice from a trusted healthcare professional. But if you do want to watch the entire press conference, I have a link in the show notes because I'm not sure everyone heard it exactly the same way that I did. But what about parents of kids with autism? From what I can tell, some of them are upset too. Now look, I took Tylenol during my pregnancies because I had horrible second trimester headaches. I have a history of migraines and No, my children do not have autism. And since my children do not have autism, I cannot really speak about what I don't know. But I can understand why a mother would be upset to think there's even a possibility that she caused something in her child. By the way, autism is not a single disease. It's a spectrum. And neurodivergence is not always a bad thing. But I don't want you to feel blamed. And what I also don't want to happen is that we stop doing the important research that the scientists are recommending about this linkage between Tylenol and autism. And I don't think we need a big awareness campaign that piles on anxiety and guilt on the backs of every worried pregnant mom who won't even eat deli meat or soft cheese, or she's worried because she woke up lying on her back, and a whole host of other things that might harm her baby. Are you understanding now why I'm feeling overly protective of all the pregnant women? And I see you, mamas. I see you doing everything in your power for your unborn baby because of the magnitude of unfathomable love you already feel. I see your heart. I watched you agonize over every decision you made to put something in your body because of your concern. And I don't think you took it lightly. I see you. And to even insinuate that pregnant women take pain relievers willy-nilly for every little thing just brought out the mama bear in me. One more bone of contention before we look at those studies that are listed on the White House homepage and the one that is not. RFK Jr. promised to do a massive testing, this is a quote, and research effort to determine the cause of autism in 5 months. And by the way, you know that's not how science works. And it should be a huge red flag if you understand the scientific method. Should you question science? That's literally how it works. You form a hypothesis, which is kind of like a question, then you test it to see if it's true using reliable, unbiased, reproducible data. And according to the mainstream media, which you may not trust, I quote, RFK Jr. and his team had decided by the beginning of September to tell Americans that acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol, was a possible cause of autism. But officials were divided, planning to discuss it as one of the many causes, ... And the big story was leucovorin, but a meeting with Tylenol's makers convinced Kennedy to put the emphasis on acetaminophen. That's pretty confusing, isn't it? But now suddenly we've discovered a drug that's taken by the majority of pregnant women, and we've laid the blame of a condition that affects 1 in 31 kids in this country at its feet. And I think those big firms are salivating. Doctors don't profit from the sale of Tylenol, but wait a minute before you hang up on me. I'd like to talk about the place where my faith intersects with science. Not politics. Politics and science should be independent. That's spin that drags us off track and divides us and fills our minds with different truths. So let me start with my faith. I believe an almighty, all-powerful God created the heavens and the earth. He created man and woman. Then the deceiver, the father of lies, the enemy of our souls, approached Eve and said, did God really say? It's a warning to us. Listen carefully to what was really said. Now look, if you didn't go to medical school, you may wonder why all of us are screaming correlation is not the same thing as causation, and maybe you just think that's boring. So let me take you to mini medical school and let's actually look at the studies on the White House website and the one they left out. But let's look at some definitions that you may or may not be familiar with. Correlation means that two things are associated with each other, like ice cream sales go up in the summer and violent crime goes up in the summer. Those two things are correlated. But unless you're willing to tackle someone over sea salt caramel, ice cream is probably not the cause of violent crime. Cause is different. Like maybe violent crimes tend to increase in the summer and people don't like eating frozen treats when it's chilly outside. So as we look at these studies, we have to look at what they say about correlation and causation. And then we'll circle back to what was said to doctors and the press and to you. And this is long, and if you want me to send you all the links in the email, then subscribe to my newsletter before Wednesday, but you can find all of the links in the show notes for easy reference. Remember, your assignment in class today is to read all the studies on the White House page and summarize which ones say acetaminophen causes autism. And we're going to circle back to that statement. The first study mentioned on the White House website is the Nurses' Health Study. This one was published in 2019 in the American Journal of Epidemiology, and I quote, "Frequent maternal use of acetaminophen in pregnancy has been linked to ADHD in children." There is no mention of autism in this study at all. The next study mentioned is the Boston Birth Cohort, and this was done in 2022, and it showed acetaminophen being detected in the cord blood of babies who had just been born. So that means that they took Tylenol in labor or at the very end of the pregnancy, and it was associated with adverse birth outcomes. And again, it's important to understand correlation and causation, because a lot of women get a fever while they're in labor. We call that chorioamnionitis, and it's associated with adverse prenatal outcomes as well. So is it the fever or is it the Tylenol? And the bottom line is, we don't know. Or are these women having pain because they have inflammation in their body? Is it the inflammation or is it the Tylenol? We don't know. And see, that is the difference between correlation and causation. 85% of people in car accidents have eaten breakfast. That's a correlation. Breakfast doesn't cause a car wreck. That would be causation. It is important to understand the difference if you learn nothing else from this podcast. Someone asked me, do you not agree with what Harvard said? Let's look at the Harvard study. And I quote, "The researchers noted that while steps should be taken to limit acetaminophen use, the drug is important for treating pain and fever during pregnancy, which can also harm the developing fetus. High fever can raise the risk of neural tube defects in preterm birth, and we recommend judicious acetaminophen use, the lowest effective dose at the shortest duration, under medical guidance tailored to individual risk-benefit assessments rather than a broad limitation." And they went on to write that in late September, the FDA would issue a letter to clinicians urging them to be cautious about the use of acetaminophen in pregnancy. And Harvard had discussed this with the HHS secretary in the weeks leading up to that announcement and provided the White House team with a statement noting his research found evidence of an association between prenatal exposure to acetaminophen and neurodevelopmental disorders. That association is strongest when acetaminophen is taken for 4 weeks or longer. For the research is needed to confirm the association and determine causality. But based on the existing evidence, I believe that caution about acetaminophen use during pregnancy, especially heavy or prolonged use, is warranted, and I can assure you that every OB doctor and pregnant woman agree. And I just want to note that in his competing interest statement, he admitted that he serves as an expert witness for plaintiffs in the cases against the makers of Tylenol. The next link refers to an article written by Johns Hopkins, and it's quoted as saying taking Tylenol during pregnancy is associated, again, not causes, an elevated risk for autism and ADHD. And Dr. Wong points out that, quote, "Although the study found a consistent association between the biomarkers of acetaminophen and its metabolites in cord blood," I guess this is referring back to the Boston birth study, "and child risk of ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, it should not be interpreted that Tylenol use causes these disorders." That's the statement if you read the full article that's linked on the homepage. So you really do have to do your own research. More studies are clearly needed to further clarify the concerns. See, that's one of the risks of prematurely saying that acetaminophen causes autism when there's not a single solitary research study or paper that makes that claim. You're going to stop the needed research to see what it is that really causes autism. Is it Tylenol use? Or is it the things that cause the mom to take Tylenol in the first place? We know that fever in pregnancy is associated with adverse outcomes. My fear is now pregnant women will tough it out. They won't take anything for fever because they don't want their baby to have autism. And what we may in fact see is an increase in the rates of autism. But let's look at what the Mount Sinai study said. It says that there is evidence that prenatal acetaminophen use may be linked to an increased risk of autism. And of course they said use the lowest dose and use it only when needed, which I think any good doctor would already do. So questions I've been asked: if there's even a chance that you're poisoning your baby, wouldn't it be best to just issue a word of caution? Yes, absolutely. If the choice is Tylenol or normal everything. But what if the choice is Tylenol versus fever, or Tylenol versus severe pain, which we know is related to inflammation? Because again, there's not a single research paper that shows that Tylenol causes autism. They left off one study. In fact, it was the largest study. This was a study done in Sweden where they found an association between Tylenol and autism. And then they looked at sibling data. And when they accounted for the number of siblings that had autism, they found no connection at all. My faith tells me that you should be as wise as a serpent and as gentle as a dove. This is as gentle as I can be. Examine the facts for yourself. Put your politics aside. And if this upsets you, then hear my heart. I'm really afraid of what this will do to mothers of autistic children, to pregnant women who are trying their best to do everything they can for the health of their baby. And if you want to discuss this further, I am available. Just email me. It's Dr. Vickie, Vickie, at healthylooksgreatonyou.com. And I would love to have a conversation with you. I will listen. I've learned my lesson about that. I will listen. But I want to caution you to check the facts. Do your own research and check the facts, because the truth matters and words matter, and healthy looks great on you.
The information contained in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered to be a substitute for medical advice. You should continue to follow up with your physician or healthcare provider and take medication as prescribed. Though the information in this podcast is evidence-based, new research may develop and recommendations may change.